What if we could travel back in time to an era when Earth was almost unrecognizable? What secrets would the planet reveal if we journeyed 1 billion years into the past? Dear time traveler, today we embark on a journey to the most remote origins of our world, long before dinosaurs ever existed, in an age when oxygen was only beginning to accumulate in the atmosphere. Imagine a primitive Earth, where continents still in their geological infancy drifted slowly across vast oceans, their waters stained in deep reddish and orange hues by intense microbial activity. In this ancient world, there are no trees, no animals, no flowers, only sprawling mats of primitive bacteria carpeting the seafloor, quietly transforming the chemistry of the planet. Above the surface, active volcanoes spewed lava and gases into a thick, suffocating atmosphere, shaping a landscape as hostile as it was mesmerizing. And as we prepare to dive into this extraordinary journey through deep time, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single step of the adventure. Thank you, and let the journey begin. We find ourselves in the Neoproterozoic, the final era of the Proterozoic eon, spanning from approximately 1 billion years ago to about 538 million years ago. It was a primitive world in which complex life had not yet flourished, and although the atmosphere already contained free oxygen thanks to the prolonged activity of cyanobacteria, the microorganisms that gave rise to photosynthesis, its composition was still very different from what we know today. The sky, when it was not obscured by dense volcanic clouds, could take on unusual colors. Sunsets were likely far redder than those we are accustomed to, reflecting the large quantities of particles and aerosols suspended in the air. The sun itself, although stable, illuminated a landscape devoid of vegetation, where atmospheric chemistry and geological activity were the dominant forces shaping the planet. During this period, Earth underwent profound geological transformations. The continents as we recognize them today did not yet exist. Instead, they were part of a vast supercontinent known as Rodinia. This immense landmass began to assemble roughly 1 billion years ago, merging fragments of crust that would later become regions such as North America, Siberia, Australia, and Antarctica. The geological foundations upon which our modern cities now stand were, hundreds of millions of years ago, components of this single supercontinent. At that time, the landscape was arid and rocky, likely dominated by mountain chains formed as a result of intense tectonic collisions. Plate dynamics were in full motion, constantly reshaping the surface of the planet. Oceanic crust was continuously created and destroyed in an ongoing cycle that repeatedly altered the distribution of land and seas. Rodinia, however, did not remain intact. Throughout the Neoproterozoic, it began to slowly fragment. The same internal forces that had contributed to its formation started to tear it apart from below. Cracks opened, and new ocean basins formed, significantly altering ocean currents and the global climate. This breakup was not a sudden event, but a gradual process that unfolded over millions of years, giving rise to smaller continental fragments that would later drift into new positions across the globe. Traces of this ancient rupture can still be found in many regions of the world, preserved in rock formations and tectonic structures that tell the story of that long-vanished union and its eventual separation. At the same time, the atmosphere was also undergoing change. Oxygen levels continued to rise, though not steadily. These fluctuations played an important role in the future evolution of life, creating the conditions necessary for the emergence of multicellular organisms. However, Earth's climate experienced one of the most extreme periods in its history. the so-called snowball Earth glaciations. During these episodes, global temperatures dropped dramatically, and vast ice sheets extended from the poles all the way to the equator. The oceans became covered by a thick layer of ice that in some regions may have reached several kilometers in thickness. In such hostile conditions, life survived in isolated refuges, such as hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, or in areas where the ice was thin enough to allow light to penetrate, enabling microbial communities to persist in small, protected ecosystems. The causes of the great Neo-Proterozoic glaciations are still debated among scientists, but the most widely accepted theories point to a combination of geographic and atmospheric factors. On one hand, the positioning of Rodinia's continents near the equator may have significantly altered oceanic and atmospheric circulation patterns. On the other, a reduction in atmospheric carbon dioxide, possibly linked to increased weathering of exposed silicate rocks following continental fragmentation, would have weakened the greenhouse effect, promoting global cooling. Over time, however, this balance shifted. Volcanic activity continued to release carbon dioxide, which gradually accumulated beneath the ice sheets. Unable to be absorbed by the oceans or fixed by the land surface, this greenhouse gas reached levels high enough to reverse the process. The resulting global warming melted the ice over a relatively short geological period, possibly within just a few thousand years, bringing an end to these extreme frozen phases. These cycles of cooling and warming not only transformed the climate, but also profoundly affected ocean chemistry. The melting ice released accumulated nutrients and altered oxygen levels in the water, changes that would have significant consequences for developing life. During this stage, the biosphere was still dominated by unicellular organisms, but signs of greater complexity began to appear. In the fossil record, we find remains of red and green algae, ancestors of many modern plants, as well as the first known multicellular organisms, collectively referred to as the Ediacaran fauna. These organisms, which emerged around 575 million years ago, displayed unusual forms and simple body structures, often with radial or bilateral symmetry and lacking hard parts that would aid fossilization. Their appearance marks a fundamental step in biological evolution. The emergence of the first metazoans, organisms composed of different cell types organized into tissues, and the precursors of the animal biodiversity that would later expand during the Cambrian. These life forms represent a transitional stage in which evolution appeared to be experimenting with a wide range of body plans. Although many of these designs did not persist, their existence reveals a phase of intense biological experimentation preceding the development of the more familiar anatomical structures we recognize today. This was the Neo-Proterozoic, a period of profound tectonic, climatic, and biological change that laid the foundations for complex life. It was a time of slow but decisive transformation, during which Earth began preparing for one of the most consequential evolutionary leaps in its history: the Cambrian explosion of life. After the dramatic snowball Earth glaciations of the Neo-Proterozoic, Earth underwent a gradual recovery that laid the groundwork for the arrival of complex multicellular life. We now find ourselves in the Ediacaran, a relatively brief yet extraordinarily significant period, spanning from approximately 635 million years ago to the beginning of the Cambrian, around 538 million years ago. This interval is often regarded as a temporal hinge, a bridge between the vast and enigmatic microbial world of the Proterozoic and the explosion of animal life that would define the Cambrian. It is considered a kind of planetary incubator where conditions began to stabilize, allowing biological experimentation on a scale never seen before. Geologically, The Ediacaran was a time of relative calm following the turbulent episodes of global glaciation. The immense ice sheets had retreated, and the planet experienced widespread warming. Sea levels were high, flooding vast expanses of newly formed continental margins created by the fragmentation of Rodinia. These warm, shallow seas, rich in nutrients released through the weathering of exposed rocks during cycles of glaciation and deglaciation, created ideal conditions for new forms of life to flourish. Planetary geodynamics, though less dramatic than during the snowball Earth phase, continued to rearrange the fragments of Rodinia into smaller, more dispersed continents. Some rocks from this period even preserve evidence of the earliest movements of organisms across the seafloor, before animals as we recognize them today truly existed. These traces are subtle, but they represent the first signs of emerging complexity. At the atmospheric level, oxygen concentrations in both the oceans and the atmosphere continued to rise, a critical factor for the development of organisms with more complex metabolisms and, consequently, larger body sizes. This increase in oxygen is thought to have enabled the evolution of aerobic respiration in multicellular organisms, a process far more energy efficient than the anaerobic metabolisms that had dominated life for billions of years. Without sufficient oxygen, a complex organism would be like a vehicle without enough fuel, unable to function properly. Earth was beginning to breathe more deeply, and life was finally able to do the same. Life during the Ediacaran provides the clearest evidence of this transition. It is here that we encounter the first complex macroscopic fossils that cannot be attributed to bacteria or algae. The Ediacaran fauna, discovered in locations across the globe, from Australia to Russia and South Africa, represents an astonishing and deeply enigmatic evolutionary experiment. These organisms were strikingly different from the animals that would appear during the Cambrian. Many displayed quilted or frond-like forms, such as the mysterious Dickinsonia, a creature that could exceed 1 meter in length and resembled an oval, segmented living mat spread across the seafloor. Others, like Sprigina, exhibited what may have been bilateral symmetry, a feature that would later become fundamental to most animal life. Perhaps most intriguingly, many of these organisms lacked mouths, intestines, or complex circulatory systems in the modern sense. This suggests they may have fed by absorbing nutrients directly from seawater or from the microbial mats carpeting the ocean floor, functioning almost like enormous living sponges. Most were predominantly sessile, anchored to the seafloor, or capable of only very limited movement, which made them particularly vulnerable to environmental change. The lifestyle of Ediacaran organisms was fundamentally different from that of later animal life. There is no clear evidence of active predation or deep burrowing into sediments. Ediacaran seafloors were largely soft and covered by gelatinous microbial mats, similar to those that had dominated the oceans for billions of years. These microbial carpets provided both a stabilized surface and a source of nourishment for many Ediacaran forms. However, this unusual biology and their reliance on such mats would ultimately make them vulnerable to competition and environmental shifts that accompanied the rise of Cambrian life. Imagine a world without active predators, where life spread across the seafloor as a mosaic of immobile or slow-moving organisms. That was the Ediacaran landscape. The disappearance of the Ediacaran fauna toward the end of the period remains a subject of scientific debate. Proposed explanations include the rise of predation during the Cambrian, driven by newly evolved organisms equipped with mouths and grasping appendages, competition from Cambrian ecosystem engineers that began disturbing sediments and destroying vital microbial mats, or environmental changes that Ediacaran organisms could not tolerate. What is clear is that, despite their brief flourishing, most Ediacaran organisms left no direct descendants, at least not in a way that clearly links them to modern animal phyla. It is as if nature erased a chalkboard of experimental designs and began again with a new set of more successful blueprints. In essence, the Ediacaran was an evolutionary laboratory, a period in which nature tested a wide range of forms and strategies for multicellular life before the more familiar body plans of the Cambrian explosion took hold. It stands as a powerful reminder that evolution does not always move in a straight line, and that multiple pathways toward biological complexity once existed. This final chapter of the Neo-Proterozoic was the quiet and mysterious prelude to the explosion of life that was about to transform the planet forever. And one might wonder, was the next great evolutionary innovation already taking shape somewhere on Earth, growing just as silently as the Ediacaran organisms once did? If the Ediacaran was the visible antechamber of complex life, then beneath the surface of those primordial oceans, in the depths of chemistry and cellular biology, the true engines of transformation were already taking shape. It is here that we must turn our attention to the underlying processes that, during the late Neo-Proterozoic and the Ediacaran, prepared the stage for life as we know it. Imagine these oceans as an immense, planet-wide laboratory where chemical reactions and microscopic biological experiments were on the verge of redefining life itself. The gradual rise of free oxygen in the oceans was, without question, the most significant catalyst. But this was not a smooth or linear process. Instead, oxygenation occurred in steps. Oxygen accumulated in the atmosphere and in the upper layers of the ocean, while the deep seas remained anoxic, devoid of oxygen, or even euxinic, rich in hydrogen sulfide. This toxic gas, which would have given the water a persistent smell of rotten eggs, dominated deep marine environments for long stretches of time. The fragmentation of the supercontinent Rodinia reshaped ocean basins, creating more passive continental margins and vast shallow continental shelves. These platform environments were far more favorable for widespread photosynthesis and for the burial of organic carbon, processes that in turn released even more oxygen into the atmosphere and surface waters. At the same time, in the deep ocean, the decomposition of sinking organic matter consumed oxygen, and the activity of sulfate-reducing bacteria produced hydrogen sulfide, a lethal substance for most forms of complex life. The ocean floor can be imagined as a vast toxic soup where only a limited set of highly specialized organisms could survive. Life, quite literally, existed in layers. Overcoming these anoxic and euxinic conditions in the deep ocean was critical. The freeze-thaw cycles of the snowball Earth glaciations had a profound chemical impact on the planet. When the glaciers retreated, intense weathering of newly exposed rocks, which had been buried beneath ice for millions of years, released a flood of essential nutrients such as phosphorus and iron into the oceans. This massive nutrient influx fueled bursts of primary productivity by algae and cyanobacteria, effectively supercharging the planktonic ecosystem. As a result, large quantities of organic carbon sank to the seafloor, promoting oxygenation of surface waters and, gradually, of deeper layers as well. Banded iron formations, those distinctive reddish rocks marked by layered patterns, serve as a visual record of moments when iron reacted with available oxygen, a kind of fossilized planetary breathing. The burial of this carbon also helped sustain elevated levels of atmospheric oxygen, creating a long-term stabilizing effect on the planet's climate. At the microbial level, this was a time of fundamental innovation. Although Ediacaran multicellular life lacked hard parts, The ability of organisms to secrete calcium carbonate or calcium phosphate was an essential prerequisite for the later emergence of skeletons and shells. The earliest evidence of biomineralization, including calcifying algae and cyanobacteria that built layered stromatolites, appeared much earlier in Earth's history. But during the Ediacaran, organisms began to gain greater control over these mineralization processes, using them to build more complex and protective body structures. It was as if life was learning to build with bricks instead of mud. This advance was not solely about protection. Mineralized structures also made it possible to form internal supports and leverage systems for muscles, paving the way for more efficient and active locomotion, a crucial development for future predation and escape. At the same time, cellular complexity continued to advance. The emergence of eukaryotic cells, with nuclei and internal organelles, was the result of a long evolutionary process that unfolded over billions of years and became firmly established during the Proterozoic. By the late Neoproterozoic, however, eukaryotes began experimenting more extensively with multicellularity. This was not merely a matter of cells sticking together, but of cellular differentiation, with different cells taking on specialized roles within a single organism. This represented a monumental evolutionary leap, the capacity to form tissues, organs, and complex body systems, including nerves, muscles, and digestive structures. Consider the human body, where each cell type performs a specific function. The foundations of this cellular cooperation were laid here. The Ediacaran organisms were among nature's earliest attempts along this path, prototypes of the complex life that was soon to follow. The emergence of active predation was another crucial, though still nascent, factor. Before the Cambrian, most life consisted of filter feeders or consumers of microbial mats, a world dominated by passive grazing. The appearance of organisms capable of piercing, biting, or digesting other organisms introduced an entirely new selective pressure. This evolutionary arms race between predators and prey drove the rapid development of defenses such as shells and skeletons, as well as more sophisticated sensory and locomotor systems. Imagine the first eye detecting an approaching predator. That simple act of vision forever changed the rules of survival. Although direct evidence for predation in the Ediacaran remains limited, signs of grazing on microbial mats by some Ediacaran organisms suggest the earliest steps toward these complex ecological interactions. Finally, the accumulation of increasingly complex genetic material was essential. With the evolution of sexual reproduction and the ability to mix genes from different individuals, the pace of evolutionary innovation accelerated dramatically. Mutations and genetic recombination made it more likely for new genes to arise, genes capable of building proteins and structures of growing complexity. This genetic toolkit, patiently assembled over billions of years of microbial evolution, was now ready to be deployed in the construction of the extraordinary diversity of animals that would soon burst onto the scene in the Cambrian. The Ediacaran and the chemical and biological processes that preceded it served as a deep and silent incubator, where life rehearsed complexity before revealing it to the world. Earth was on the verge of unveiling its next great act. After the icy grip of the snowball Earth glaciations and the planet's gradual thaw, we enter the Cambrian, a period spanning from approximately 538 million years ago to 485 million years ago. This was not simply another chapter in Earth's geological history. It was a radical turning point, an unprecedented burst of biological diversity known as the Cambrian explosion. Before this period, life, though already present, was largely microbial or composed of simple multicellular organisms, such as the enigmatic Ediacaran forms, which lacked hard structures and complex organization. But during the Cambrian, the script of life was rewritten entirely, and it unfolded at a breathtaking pace in geological terms. Imagine an oceanic world tinted greenish or brown, where sunlight penetrates shallow waters, and the seafloor, once dominated by vast, gelatinous microbial mats, begins to be colonized by an astonishing variety of living forms. The atmosphere continued to evolve, with a sustained rise in oxygen levels that allowed organisms to develop more efficient metabolisms and, as a result, grow larger and more complex. The fragmentation of the supercontinent Rodinia had produced multiple smaller, widely dispersed continents, generating vast expanses of shallow, warm, and well-lit epicontinental seas. These nutrient-rich marine environments, fed by erosion from newly emerged land masses, became ideal nurseries for the emergence of new life forms. Think of it as the opening of a gigantic aquatic theme park, ready to be filled. The most distinctive feature of the Cambrian was the sudden appearance in the fossil record of most of the major animal phyla we recognize today. This does not mean they emerged out of nowhere. Evolution is a gradual process that had been unfolding at the molecular level for millions of years, as we saw during the Ediacaran. Rather, organisms began for the first time to develop skeletons, shells, and other mineralized hard parts that fossilized far more easily. This marked a fundamental shift. For the first time, animals could protect themselves from predators, anchor themselves to the substrate, or move with greater efficiency. The evolution of complex eyes, such as those found in trilobites, allowed animals to perceive their surroundings in an entirely new way. Suddenly, seeing and being seen became a matter of life and death. Trilobites, for example, are iconic fossils of this period. With more than 20,000 described species, they rank among the most diverse groups in Earth's history. These marine arthropods ranged in size from just a few millimeters to more than 70 centimeters and inhabited seafloors across all latitudes. Their remarkable diversity of forms, distinctive body segmentation, and extraordinary compound eyes, some composed of thousands of individual lenses, make them key fossil indicators of the Cambrian. But they were far from alone. Alongside them appeared the first mollusks, including early cephalopods and gastropods, brachiopods with their bivalved shells and feeding structures called lophophores, echinoderms such as primitive sea stars and sea cucumbers, and the earliest starfish, which still bore little resemblance to their modern counterparts. Crucially, this period also saw the emergence of the first chordates, the precursors of the vertebrates from which we descend. Organisms such as Picaia, a small eel-like creature with a primitive notochord, a flexible rod that represents the precursor of the vertebral column, mark one of the earliest steps along our own evolutionary lineage. Imagine it, a tiny swimming worm-like animal as our most distant known ancestor. Cambrian marine ecosystems were vibrant and dynamic, far more complex than anything that had come before. The appearance of the first active predators, such as the anomalocaridids, was a true game-changer. These strange, shrimp-like creatures could reach lengths of up to 1 meter, armed with grasping appendages for capturing prey and compound eyes that made them formidable hunters. Their very existence transformed food webs. Previously, life had relied mainly on filter feeding or passive grazing on microbial mats. Now, complex interactions of pursuit and escape emerged, driving further diversification of body plans and survival strategies. Life diversified not only in form, but also in behavior, including burrowing and deep excavation of sediments, which disrupted ancient microbial mats and increasingly sophisticated modes of locomotion. Earth had entered a phase of biological acceleration, where evolutionary experimentation produced a dazzling array of body designs. Many of these forms, such as the bizarre hallucigenia, with its spines and peculiar limbs, would not survive later extinction events, but they helped lay the foundations for life as we know it today. The Cambrian explosion was not a single instant, but a span of tens of millions of years during which the rate of evolutionary innovation skyrocketed. It left behind a fossil legacy that continues to captivate us, revealing the origins of animal complexity. The planet, once home primarily to simple life forms, was transforming into a vast and intricate marine ecosystem, a prelude to the extraordinary wonders still to come. While the Cambrian explosion marked the appearance of most major animal phyla, the true wonder of this period lies not only in the emergence of new life forms, but in the rapid development of ecological sophistication and specialization. Cambrian seas became a vast evolutionary laboratory where every available niche was explored with remarkable intensity, giving rise to an intricate web of biological interactions. It was a time of trial and error on a scale never before seen. One of the less obvious yet profoundly influential innovations of the Cambrian was the rise of bioturbation. Prior to the Cambrian, seafloors were dominated by extensive microbial mats that covered the sediment like a smooth, largely undisturbed carpet. Life moved mainly across these mats or grazed upon them at the surface without significantly altering their structure. During the Cambrian, however, the appearance of organisms capable of burrowing and constructing tunnels fundamentally transformed the marine substrate. The burrows and galleries left behind by worms and other animals disrupted the physical structure of the sediment, mixing its layers and ventilating the seafloor. This form of biological engineering was so widespread that its traces are still visible today as fossilized burrows and trackways preserved in ancient rocks. Bioturbation had far-reaching consequences. It altered sediment chemistry, allowing oxygen to penetrate deeper layers and releasing trapped nutrients, which in turn promoted the diversification of organisms living within or atop the sediment. This constant disturbance also hindered the reformation of extensive microbial mats, opening entirely new ecological niches for animal life. The diversification of Cambrian life also extended to the microscopic organisms that formed the foundation of marine food webs. Plankton, including both phytoplankton, the microscopic photosynthetic producers, and zooplankton, small animals that fed upon them, underwent significant expansion. These tiny life forms became the base of marine trophic chains, sustaining filter feeders and, in turn, supporting larger predators. The abundance of phytoplankton drove a more active carbon cycle within the oceans, influencing water chemistry and oxygen levels. Imagine billions upon billions of nearly invisible organisms quietly sustaining the rise of the marine giants that continue to captivate us today. Another crucial aspect of the Cambrian was the evolution of more advanced sensory and nervous systems. The emergence of complex eyes, such as those of trilobites, has already been noted, but the ability to process visual information required substantial neurological development. Nervous systems became more centralized and sophisticated, allowing animals to coordinate increasingly complex movements, detect predators or prey at a distance, and respond more rapidly and effectively to their surroundings. This neurological advancement fueled a coevolution of evasion behaviors and hunting strategies, creating ecological dynamics never previously observed. Suddenly, hiding and seeking became a matter of survival, and the most perceptive, agile, or responsive organisms gained a decisive advantage. Evidence for this extraordinary biodiversity comes from exceptional fossil sites known as Lagerstätten, where burial conditions were so precise that not only hard parts, but also delicate soft tissues were preserved. The most famous example is the Burgess Shale of Canada, a remarkable snapshot of Cambrian marine life. Fossils such as Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and vacuum-like frontal proboscis, or Wiwaxia, covered in spines and scales that give it the appearance of a prehistoric sea hedgehog, reveal the astonishing evolutionary experimentation that took place during this time. Many of these organisms do not fit neatly into modern animal phyla, suggesting that nature was testing a wide array of body plans, some of which proved evolutionarily transient and left no descendants. The study of these soft-bodied fossils has been essential for understanding the true diversity of early life and for tracing the origins of modern body plans. It is as if nature unleashed a storm of ideas, and only the most effective designs endured. Beyond animals, the Cambrian also witnessed the proliferation of multicellular algae. Both red and green algae formed dense beds in shallow waters, providing food and shelter for many of the diversifying animals. Although these algae did not yet build the complex coral reefs that would emerge much later, they laid the groundwork for more structured ecosystems and created some of the earliest complex underwater landscapes. In summary, the Cambrian was not merely the moment when animals acquired skeletons. It was an era of profound ecological innovation. Life developed not only new forms, but also new behaviors and interactions, establishing the foundations for the complexity of all future ecosystems, both marine and terrestrial. With the Cambrian explosion having seeded the oceans with unprecedented biodiversity, life continued its relentless advance. We now enter the Ordovician, a period spanning from approximately 485 million years ago to 443 million years ago. If the Cambrian was the dawn of biological complexity, the Ordovician was an era of consolidation and expansion, during which those newly established body plans diversified and matured, and the oceans evolved into increasingly intricate and stable marine ecosystems. This was a time that can be thought of as a blue bloom, when marine life reached remarkable levels of abundance and complexity. Geologically, the Ordovician was characterized by extensive marine transgressions. Sea levels were significantly higher than today, flooding vast continental areas and creating immense shallow epicontinental seas. These warm, well-lit environments provided ideal habitats for the proliferation of benthic life, organisms that live on or within the seafloor. Continental configurations remained very different from the modern world. The supercontinent Gondwana dominated the southern hemisphere, while smaller land masses such as Laurentia, the precursor of North America, Baltica, including parts of Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, and Siberia were scattered across the northern hemisphere, separated by broad oceans. The extensive limestone deposits formed during this time, now quarried across many regions, stand as evidence of these warm, shallow seas teeming with carbonate-producing life. The atmosphere continued its slow but steady enrichment in oxygen. This increase, driven by the ongoing photosynthetic activity of marine algae, not only supported more complex animal life, but also led to a transformative development, the formation of the ozone layer. Located in the stratosphere, this layer gradually thickened enough to filter harmful ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Although life remained largely confined to the oceans, the emerging protection provided by the ozone layer was a crucial prerequisite for the eventual colonization of land, which until then had been a biologically hostile and sterile environment due to intense solar radiation. Without this shield, Earth's surface would have remained a biological wasteland. In Ordovician seas, biodiversity reached new heights during what is known as the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event. Trilobites remained abundant and continued to diversify, adapting to a wide range of ecological niches, with some species developing even more sophisticated eyes or elaborate defensive structures. Yet the most dramatic radiations occurred in other groups. Brachiopods underwent a major evolutionary expansion, becoming one of the dominant components of seafloor communities. They displayed a remarkable diversity of forms and sizes, surpassing in diversity the bivalve mollusks that are more familiar to us today. Bryozoans, small colonial animals that formed branching or encrusting structures, also flourished, creating intricate miniature cities that filtered food particles from the water. Mollusks diversified extensively as well. Nautiloid cephalopods, bearing long, straight conical shells, some reaching impressive lengths of several meters, rose to become apex predators of Ordovician oceans. Picture a massive squid-like hunter encased in a rigid, pointed shell, gliding through the water as it stalked its prey. Armed with tentacles and powerful beaks, these predators exerted strong selective pressure on other organisms, driving the evolution of improved defenses and more effective escape strategies. Some fossilized nautiloid shells are so large that a person could nearly hide within them. The Ordovician also saw the emergence of the first true corals and the construction of extensive reef systems. Built by tabulate and rugose corals, together with calcareous algae and stromatoporoids, sponge-like organisms with calcium carbonate skeletons, these reefs created complex three-dimensional habitats. They provided shelter, food, and breeding grounds for countless species. As ecosystem engineers, early reefs increased the structural complexity of the seafloor and altered ocean currents and sedimentation patterns, influencing marine environments on a broad scale. A development of profound importance for the future of vertebrate evolution was the diversification of agnathan fishes, the earliest jawless vertebrates. Although they lacked jaws and paired fins and were often encased in bony armor, their appearance marked a critical evolutionary milestone. These early fishes were primarily detritivores, or filter feeders that scoured the seafloor for food, but their existence laid the groundwork for the later evolution of jaws and the rise of the diverse fishes we know today. Some of these primitive vertebrates resembled small armored plates gliding just above the seabed. The Ordovician, however, did not end in stability and abundance. Toward the close of the period, Earth experienced one of the most severe mass extinctions in its history, the Ordovician-Silurian mass extinction. Occurring in two major phases, this event eliminated a large proportion of marine life, particularly species inhabiting warm, shallow seas. The primary cause is thought to have been a combination of global glaciation and subsequent sea level change. The growth of a massive ice cap over Gondwana triggered a sharp drop in sea levels and widespread cooling. When the ice later retreated, rapid sea level rise and widespread oceanic oxygen depletion followed. Though devastating, this extinction opened new ecological niches, setting the stage for recovery and evolutionary radiation during the Silurian. In essence, the Ordovician was the era in which marine life consolidated, diversified, and prepared to confront future challenges, a powerful reminder of both the fragility and resilience of life on our planet. After the Great Ordovician extinction, Earth entered the Silurian period. This was a time of recovery and profound evolutionary innovation, not only within the oceans, but also marked by the first cautious steps of life onto solid land, a milestone that would permanently transform the face of our planet. Think of the Silurian as the era of the green and blue pioneers. Geologically, the Silurian was characterized by moderate global warming and a stabilization of sea levels following the dramatic fluctuations of the late Ordovician. The massive ice sheets that had covered Gondwana melted away, releasing vast volumes of water and raising ocean levels, which allowed shallow epicontinental seas to persist across large portions of the continents. These warm, oxygen-rich seas were crucial for the recovery and renewed diversification of marine life. The continents remained dispersed, but significant movements were underway. Laurentia and Baltica gradually converged, eventually forming a new landmass known as Euramerica, or Laurasia. This continental convergence triggered major orogenic events, the formation of large mountain belts, including the earliest ancestors of the Appalachian Mountains in what is now eastern North America. These mountains formed through continental collision long before the rise of the Alps or the Himalayas. What we see today are merely the deeply eroded roots of once towering ranges. These newly formed highlands began to influence climate patterns and created fresh rocky surfaces that, over time, would become targets for biological colonization. In the oceans, life rebounded with remarkable speed and diversified even further, reoccupying ecological niches left vacant by the extinction. Corals, both tabulate and rugose, along with stromatoporoids, sponge-like organisms with calcareous skeletons that sometimes formed massive dome-shaped structures, underwent a dramatic expansion. Together, they built extensive and highly complex reef systems. Silurian reefs were vibrant ecosystems, functioning as shelters, feeding grounds, and breeding sites for a wide array of organisms, from small mollusks to early fishes. They were, in essence, the underwater cities of their time, bustling with biological activity and far more complex than the reef patches of the Ordovician. In some areas, reef biomass was so dense that the surrounding water became oversaturated with nutrients. Brachiopods and bryozoans also continued their diversification, occupying a wide range of seafloor habitats and often forming massive colonies. Trilobites, although no longer the undisputed rulers of the oceans and already in decline, persisted in many new forms and showed adaptations to diverse environments. Some species developed stalked eyes or increasingly ornate exoskeletons for defense. Crinoids, lily-shaped echinoderms anchored to the seafloor by long stalks, became extraordinarily abundant in certain regions, forming vast underwater meadows where their feathery arms filtered food particles from the water. Among the most impressive and feared predators of the Silurian were the eurypterids, commonly known as sea scorpions. Though not true scorpions, and more closely related to modern sea spiders, these arthropods could reach lengths of more than 2 meters in some species, such as Gecolopterus rhenanii. Armed with powerful serrated claws and segmented bodies, they were apex predators in many marine and brackish environments, hunting primitive fishes and other invertebrates with efficiency. Imagine encountering a human-sized scorpion beneath the water, an encounter few organisms would survive. Their wide range of forms and sizes reflects just how successful they were in shallow marine and estuarine habitats, occasionally even venturing into freshwater systems. Yet the most consequential developments of the Silurian unfolded at the boundary between water and land. It was during this period that the first vascular plants, equipped with internal transport systems for water and nutrients, xylem and phloem, made their appearance. Organisms such as Cooksonia, a tiny plant no more than a few centimeters tall, with simple branching stems and terminal sporangia containing spores, represent the earliest unequivocal fossils of land plants. These pioneers still relied heavily on water for reproduction, releasing spores that required moist conditions to germinate, and they were confined to damp environments near lakes, rivers, and floodplains. They did not form forests or dense vegetation, but instead created low, scattered carpets that began to colonize shorelines. Remarkably, The planet's first green covering consisted not of towering trees, but of fragile knee-high plants. The colonization of land by plants did not occur in isolation. It coincided with the appearance of the first terrestrial arthropods. While sea scorpions continued to dominate aquatic environments, some of their relatives, including primitive millipedes and early arachnids, began venturing onto land. They likely fed on decaying plant matter or on small invertebrates sheltering among the new vegetation. These early interactions between land plants and animals laid the foundations for the complex terrestrial ecosystems that would later emerge. The increasingly robust ozone layer played a critical role in this transition, shielding these pioneers from harmful ultraviolet radiation and making survival outside the water possible. The Silurian was, therefore, an era of experimentation and bold evolutionary advances. Life had recovered from catastrophe and was now preparing for an even greater expansion, opening the path toward the conquest of an entirely new and vast realm: solid ground. The story of life on Earth was about to become far more diverse and profoundly complex. After the era of recovery and the first tentative murmurs of life on land, we now enter the Devonian, a period spanning from approximately 419 million years ago to 358 million years ago. This interval is often known as the Age of Fishes, a title that reflects the extraordinary diversification and evolution of aquatic life. Yet it was also a pivotal time for life on land, marked by the emergence of the first true forests, a transformation that would permanently reshape the face of the planet. Geologically, the Devonian witnessed the continued assembly of the continents. The collision and union of Laurentia and Baltica to form Euramerica, also known as Laurasia, progressed steadily, while Gondwana continued its slow drift across the southern hemisphere. The convergence of these landmasses gave rise to extensive mountain chains, including the northern Appalachians in Euramerica, whose uplift is recorded today along the eastern margin of North America. The erosion of these newly formed highlands delivered vast quantities of sediments and nutrients into the oceans and river deltas, enriching coastal ecosystems. The overall Devonian climate was warm and relatively stable, with widespread shallow seas persisting across much of the planet. These conditions created ideal environments for marine life to flourish. Picture expansive, swampy coastlines where life was beginning to take its first awkward steps beyond the water. In the oceans, the title Age of Fishes is fully deserved. Jawless fishes, the agnathons that first appeared in the Ordovician, continued to diversify, but their dominance was increasingly challenged by the rise of jawed fishes. The evolution of jaws, a revolutionary innovation that likely originated from modified gill arches, marked a turning point in vertebrate history. Jaws allowed fishes to bite, grasp, and process prey more efficiently, unlocking entirely new feeding strategies and ecological roles. This single innovation triggered an explosion of predatory diversity and fundamentally reshaped marine food webs. Among the jawed fishes, the placoderms emerged as the dominant predators of the Devonian seas. These armored fishes possessed massive bony plates protecting the head and thorax, and some species reached astonishing sizes. The most famous of them, Dunkleosteus, could grow up to 10 meters in length and weigh several tons, making it one of the greatest superpredators of its time. Rather than true teeth, Dunkleosteus wielded enormous, self-sharpening bony plates that functioned like shears, capable of delivering bite forces comparable to those of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Alongside placoderms, the first cartilaginous fishes, the chondrichthyans, appeared. These early relatives of modern sharks and rays were far more primitive than their descendants, but they marked the beginning of a lineage that would endure for hundreds of millions of years. The most consequential innovation for vertebrate evolution, however, emerged with the rise of the bony fishes, or osteichthyons. These divided into two major groups: the ray-finned fishes, or actinopterygians, which include the vast majority of modern fishes, and the lobe-finned fishes, or sarcopterygians. It was the latter group that would change the course of life on Earth. With their fleshy, bone-supported fins, lobe-finned fishes were the direct precursors of tetrapods, vertebrates with 4 limbs adapted for life on land. Fossils such as Tiktaalik represent a remarkable snapshot of this transition. Tiktaalik was an extraordinary fish with limbs, displaying a mosaic of features associated with both aquatic and terrestrial life. It retained scales, fins, and gills, but also possessed a mobile neck, robust ribs, and limb bones within its fins that correspond closely to the bones of our own arms and legs. It stands as a crucial evolutionary bridge, directly linking fishes to the earliest land vertebrates. This is the lineage that ultimately leads to us. On land, the Devonian brought about a dramatic ecological transformation. The small vascular plants of the Silurian evolved into more complex and diverse forms. Plants developed deeper root systems capable of extracting water and nutrients from the soil, as well as more efficient vascular tissues that allowed them to grow taller and challenge gravity itself. During this period, the first primitive forests appeared, dominated by plants such as lycophytes, scale trees, with distinctive patterned trunks, tree ferns, and the earliest gymnosperms. Although these forests differed greatly from modern ones, they created the first truly complex terrestrial environments, providing shade, moisture, and shelter. Their impact was so profound that the spread of trees, through the action of their roots, accelerated rock weathering and erosion, releasing even more nutrients into rivers and oceans. Dense vegetation dramatically altered erosion and sedimentation patterns and contributed to the formation of true soils for the first time. The colonization of land by plants had a profound effect on the atmosphere. As these early forests expanded, global rates of photosynthesis increased sharply. This led to a significant rise in atmospheric oxygen levels and a simultaneous reduction in carbon dioxide. These changes influenced global climate, promoting cooling, and further paved the way for the expansion of terrestrial life by making the air increasingly breathable. Land environments also witnessed the diversification of terrestrial arthropods. Alongside primitive millipedes and early spiders, the first wingless insects appeared, exploiting the newly abundant plant resources. Predators such as arachnids evolved in parallel, taking advantage of this emerging terrestrial food web. Imagine a world in which insects, not vertebrates, were the earliest dominant land animals. Toward the end of the Devonian, life in the oceans faced another major crisis: the Late Devonian mass extinction. This event unfolded in multiple phases and severely affected marine organisms, particularly coral reefs, and many groups of fishes, including most placoderms. The precise causes remain complex, but are thought to involve global climatic changes, possibly linked to falling sea levels and widespread oceanic anoxia. These conditions may have been intensified by the massive burial of organic carbon associated with the expansion of vast terrestrial forests, which altered the global carbon cycle. Despite this setback, the Devonian stands as an era of unparalleled innovation. It laid the foundations of modern marine and terrestrial ecosystems and opened the door for the rise of land-dwelling vertebrates. The stage was set for life to continue its bold expansion onto land, reshaping the future of the planet forever. Having witnessed the diversification of fishes and the rise of the first forests, we now move into the Carboniferous, a period spanning from approximately 358 million years ago to 298 million years ago. This interval is fundamental for two main reasons: the massive formation of coal deposits that give the period its name, and the explosion of terrestrial life, with amphibians dominating the landscapes and the first reptiles making their appearance. Think of this era as the age of giant forests and enriched air, a time of profound planetary transformation. Geologically, the Carboniferous was marked by intense tectonic activity. The continents continued their slow drift, with Gondwana moving northward and eventually colliding with Euramerica. This colossal continental collision set in motion the assembly of the supercontinent Pangaea, a process that would be completed during the Permian. The resulting orogenic events raised vast mountain ranges, including the Ural Mountains between Europe and Asia and the Appalachians in North America, which still bear witness to the magnitude of these ancient collisions. The Appalachian Mountains we see today are merely the deeply eroded remnants of a once towering range that rivaled the modern Himalayas in scale and height. The global climate of the Carboniferous was predominantly warm and humid, especially in equatorial regions, conditions that strongly favored the exuberant growth of vegetation. The defining hallmark of the Carboniferous was the proliferation of immense tropical swamps and dense forests across equatorial and subtropical regions. These forests were dominated by gigantic plants such as tree-sized lycophytes, which could reach heights of up to 30 meters and possessed thick trunks covered in distinctive leaf scars, giving them a texture reminiscent of reptilian skin. Tree ferns were widespread, as were giant horsetails known as calamites, which formed dense understories beneath the forest canopy. When these plants died, their remains accumulated in thick layers within swampy environments where oxygen was scarce, preventing complete decomposition. Over millions of years, pressure and heat transformed this organic material into the vast coal deposits we mine today. These deposits later became the primary fossil fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution. The coal that heats homes and generates electricity in the modern world is, quite literally, the compressed legacy of these ancient Carboniferous forests. The expansion of these immense forests had a dramatic impact on Earth's atmosphere. Large-scale photosynthesis by this enormous plant biomass drove atmospheric oxygen levels to unprecedented heights. Estimates suggest that oxygen concentrations may have reached as much as 35%, compared to about 21% today. This oxygen-rich atmosphere had profound consequences for terrestrial life, allowing some arthropods to attain truly gigantic sizes. In this oxygen-saturated world, terrestrial arthropods underwent a spectacular evolutionary radiation. This was the age of the mega-insects. Dragonflies such as Meganeura could achieve wingspans of up to 75 centimeters, comparable to a small hawk. Meanwhile, giant millipedes like Arthropleura grew to lengths of more than 2 meters, making them the largest land-dwelling invertebrates in Earth's history. High oxygen levels made such gigantism possible because these animals relied on a tracheal respiratory system, a network of tubes that delivers oxygen directly to their tissues. Greater atmospheric oxygen meant that these tubes could function efficiently over longer distances, supporting much larger bodies. Yet the most important evolutionary developments of the Carboniferous involved vertebrates on land. Amphibians, which had evolved from lobe-finned fishes during the Devonian, came to dominate terrestrial ecosystems. These early amphibians varied widely in size and form, ranging from small salamander-like animals to massive crocodile-shaped predators several meters long. They remained tied to water for reproduction, laying their eggs in aquatic environments, and were the apex predators of many swamps and riverbanks, feeding on fishes and large invertebrates. Toward the end of the Carboniferous, a pivotal evolutionary milestone was reached with the appearance of the first reptiles. The key innovation that defined reptiles was the amniotic egg. This type of egg, enclosed by a protective shell and containing internal membranes that retain moisture and provide nutrients, freed vertebrates from the need to reproduce in water. For the first time, an animal could lay its eggs on dry land, effectively enclosing the embryo within a self-contained life support system. This breakthrough allowed reptiles to colonize drier environments, far from swamps and wetlands, opening vast new ecological opportunities and laying the groundwork for the eventual dominance of reptiles during the Mesozoic era. The earliest reptiles, such as Hylonomus, were small, lizard-like creatures, but their appearance marked the beginning of a profound shift in vertebrate evolution. While marine life continued to evolve during the Carboniferous, with early sharks and bony fishes diversifying in the oceans, the primary arena of evolutionary innovation during this period was unmistakably on land. The Carboniferous was a time of unparalleled plant biomass, colossal invertebrates, and the first confident steps of vertebrates toward conquering terrestrial environments. It prepared the stage for the dramatic environmental and biological changes that would soon unfold in the Permian, reshaping life on Earth once again. After the lush exuberance of the Carboniferous swamps, we now enter the Permian, a period spanning from approximately 298 million years ago to 251 million years ago. This was an age of dramatic contrasts, defined by the consolidation of the supercontinent Pangaea and, tragically, by the most devastating mass extinction in Earth's history. The Permian is often remembered as the age of great deserts and the Great Catastrophe. Geologically, the Permian was marked by the near-complete formation and dominance of the supercontinent Pangaea. The slow but relentless collision of Gondwana with Laurussia, formed from the union of Laurentia and Baltica, along with Siberia and the accretion of smaller continental blocks, culminated in a colossal landmass stretching almost from pole to pole. A single continent so vast that crossing it from one coast to the other would have taken months or even years through harsh and unforgiving terrain. This immense landmass was surrounded by a single global ocean, Panthalassa. The assembly of Pangaea had profound climatic and oceanographic consequences. Continental collisions raised enormous mountain chains whose heights cast vast rain shadows across the interior of the supercontinent. As a result, immense deserts formed far from the moderating influence of the oceans. The Permian climate was far more extreme than that of the Carboniferous. While coastal regions and areas near the oceans experienced seasonal, monsoon-like conditions, the interior of Pangaea became intensely arid and dry, with sharp temperature fluctuations and widespread water scarcity. This continental-scale dryness evokes modern deserts such as the Gobi or the Sahara, but stretched across thousands of kilometers. As Carboniferous swamps declined and arid environments expanded, global vegetation underwent a profound shift. The towering lycophyte forests and tree ferns that had dominated the Carboniferous began to disappear in many regions, replaced by plants better adapted to drought. Primitive gymnosperms, including early conifers, cycads, and ginkgos, became increasingly common. With protected seeds that no longer required free water for fertilization and a greater tolerance for dry conditions, these plants represented a crucial adaptation to life on an increasingly arid continent. If you enjoyed this journey through deep time, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the mysteries of the past together. We'll see you in the next Jurassic adventure.